Right, today we're ready to assemble our HM48. We've made all our modifications to our saddle. These holes here have been elongated to suit our ball nut. We've had clearance, and we've also got clearance for the ball screw through here. It's a little bit different to the MH28. It needs to be assembled in a slightly different way because of the way the ball nuts go on. First of all, you place your ball nut on your saddle. Put your bolts in from underneath. And just loosely do them up. We've got our main X-axis sitting here on the table, upside down, because we need to align this ball screw initially before we put it all on the machine. So we get this piece. Then we slide our carriage on. We get our one end plate, we put our ball screw support bearing in. Now this is not final assembly, it's just to align the ball screw. So we don't need Loctite or anything on these screws just yet. Put it on your shaft. Loosely fit this plate. And just fit it tight enough so it's in place, but it can move around to align itself. We do the same with our other plate. We put our angular contact ball screw in, thrust bearing in. Then we loosely fit this plate here as well on the end. And again, we loosely fit this plate into its holes. Again, we leave that slightly free, so it's got movement. Once the end plates are on, we then loosely assemble the gib. We're not trying to get the gib in final adjustment, we're just trying to get it so there's not too much play and it centres the bed. There's the drill. Just run it through each range of motion. Temporary lock down this one. And as level as you can get it. We then run the bed to the other end. And do the same at this end. Get it nice and centered and aligned. Run it from each end to its range of moves to make sure there's no tight spots. Bring it back to the centre and then do up these ones here. Just run it through its range again before you do your final tightening. Once you're happy with that, do a final tighten down to this. This will be its final position. And then we take these end plates off again, so we can do the final assembly. Because of the way this goes together, we need, with the wide ball screw, we need to get the wide ball screw in first and done up before we put this carriage on. Then remove the ball screw all the way to one end so we can get it off. Take this gib back out. And slide the saddle right off. Put it aside. Now we can remove the X-axis plate. And we're ready to start on mounting up the Y-axis. Now to prepare the Y-axis, we get our mounting plate. These are used for a couple of different machines, so it's got some extra holes in it. We place the bolts in the two original holes. There's two original holes in here from the original setup. Slightly screw that on. You'll notice the original hole in here doesn't line up because we've moved the ball screw down slightly because it's a bigger ball screw. We then get a 40mm hole saw and a drill, place it in here and use this to align it, and slowly just find our way until we've gone through them all the way through. It only takes 3 or 4 minutes, just go nice and slow and you'll have a nice perfect hole. When you're finished, take it off. And you'll notice there's another hole now, slightly below the original one, nicely centered. We then get the rest of our plate for our motor mount and our thrust. We've already pre-assembled our motor mount partially, and we've got a thrust bearing here. Place our thrust in, line up the holes. Now this is final assembly, so we put some Loctite on our bolts. We lock down the thrust in place. Turn this plate over, line it up. Then set it aside and get your ball screw. Once that's done, we get our ball screw. We've fitted our ball nut housing to it. We put an oil line on it. We feed that in from the bottom through the hole. Then we slide the bearing on and our lock nut. Now at this stage this doesn't need to be overly tight, just nip it up by hand. We need to check to make sure our ball nut isn't too long. It has clearance at the back. If not, grind it to suit. That one's fine. We put our 2 bolts in here, secure it to the frame. Make sure the ball nut's up the right way. And then gently start these bolts. Same as before, we're not going to tighten them up too tight just yet until the whole assembly is in place. So we can get our alignment perfect. You'll also notice we've taken an extra 50mm out of in here. We put a hole, point in the centre, put a hole saw in, and then cut the rest with a hacksaw, just to give us more travel if we want it later on. It means that it can come out past the end of the bed here. Then we just place our drill onto here lightly. Bring that ball nut somewhere back into the centre. We then get our saddle assembly. Place it on. And you may find you need to loosen this off a little bit so the ball screw drops down away from the saddle. So we're going to slide that on. And then we line up our ball nut housing so it goes into the dowel pin. Put our bolt in and just loosely do that up to start with. Redo up these here loosely again. We then get a gib and loosely fit that. We don't need to be overly tight just yet, we just need to be close. And then I'll just run it through its range of motion. And you notice we now got, that's where the original travel was. We've now got the ability, if we need to come out to about there. So increase the travel quite a bit. Run that backwards and forwards a couple of times. Make sure everything's good. And then lightly start to nip everything down and retest again. Just run it through its paces again, make sure everything's still free and everything's true. Particular attention when it gets towards this end, to make sure there's no binding. And that's all good. Now we go over and just check all the bolts, make sure that's done up, play around and adjust our gib a little bit if we feel like it at this time. Now to do up the nuts on the thrust bearing, we get a plumb connector. Just take it apart, make sure you get the end without the rubber, put that on, just do it up, get a spanner onto this, and I'll just normally just hold this. Doesn't need huge pressure on it, just needs to be nipped up. And also on these there's a small grub screw. Just do that grub screw up, tighten it down gently, that's all we need. And then we can take this coupler off again for the time being. And put it back together. Alright, now that's assembled, we put the X plate on. We first put our bearing plate on this side. And we just fit this loosely again until we've got it lined up. Alright, let's reposition this again. Now we've got that on. We do the same with the motor end. And the same with this end, we just fit it loosely to start with. Pull onto this bearing. Now the bearing at this other end is floating, so if you find it's a bit too much gap here, as you do it up, it'll push that bearing back. We then fit our gib. Next you get your snap ring, a pair of circuit pliers. And then you put snap ring on the bearing at the end. Then we put our nut on the front here. And so we can do it up, we put our thumb connector on. And just do it. Once it's tight enough, do up your lock nut, and we're all good. Once we've done that, we put the drill on again, our gib's tight, and we run it from one end to the other to help centralise everything. Once at this end, we go through and nip this down. Now it's centralised. Do the one up. Run it through the other end. Get these ones up. And then just run it through its range of motions and check it. Once that's done, just go through and do your final tightening. And then you're ready to fit your motors. Alright, now we're ready to Z-axis assembly together. We've got our ball nut and our adapter on there, we've got an oil fitting in there, and we've assembled our motor plate with the thrust bearing and done up the nut, sorry. Right, this we place in the top, we've got to go on a slight angle. And then as we come down we straighten it up. In this case we're going to put an oil line in now because it's easier to get to. That's in and done up. We continue dropping this down until the ball nut lines up. Just right there. Put our bolt in. And we loosely lead it up. Wind our motor down to where we need to be. And we loosely put the bolts in for the motor mount. Pick up our lock, so it drops down, lightly do these up. We don't want them done up too tight because we want it to be able to self-centre. We'll do to start with, get our drill, Just run it up and down, just make sure it's centered. Drop this bolt. Run it back up the top again. And from there we do up our motor mount tight. And then run it through its cover again. Make sure everything's good. And then we can do everything up properly. Then we're ready to put our couplers and our motors on and start our electrics. Well, the motors are on now. All three motors are in place. Got the oil and grease off the bed. Waiting to be wired up. We've got the head unit back on with its pneumatic ATC, and the Z motor's back on. So it's all ready to rock and roll. Next comes wiring and an enclosure for this machine, and then a full ATC carousel.